I guess this happens from time to time. You suddenly, I could see you, but you were frozen.
Well, let me tell you, on this show, I am so very, very, very used to this. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary show last week. We had so much drama when it came to the technology and incorporating all the different systems from all the different authors around the world. It was so much fun. I mean, once it worked, we had a blast. We started over 6 times, put it that way. So we're going to start you over again. Okay? Because everything you were saying, I was right there with you, and it sounded wonderful. Okay. Here we go again. Ready?
Ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Opus Night, and you have entered Night Vision. Tonight we have Robert pronounce it, Willis Croft.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. And his new book, which is actually a series, we're beginning with Slingshot, and he is actually going to tell us precisely how this came to be. You have the floor.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. Let me start out by saying that I've been around the block a couple of times, as you can probably tell by looking at me. And one of the things I did was spend a year at the Geographic South Pole in charge of National Science Foundation atmospheric research. Before I left for the pole, I took with me a handful of scientific papers because I knew that I would have time on my hands down there. We were actually in isolation, just 17 of us for 9 months. Oh. Anyway, one of the papers I took was a paper written by scientist Keith Lofstrom about building a system that could move people and cargo into space without using rockets. It fascinated me. When I came out from the pole, I looked Keith up, and we spent several days together discussing the engineering and the science behind the project, and then laid out the basis for the novel, which became Slingshot, and you can see that behind me in the image. So let me read to you the blurb for the book, and then we can pick up and talk about it.
Beautiful.
Slingshot is a love story about a man, a woman, another man, another woman, some gender bending, and a machine, the largest ever built. Slingshot is a mystery about a missing aviatrix, a conspiracy, a true believer. Slingshot is an adventure about following a dream, the ocean deep, outer space. Slingshot is about constructing the first space launch loop stretching 2,600 kilometers between Baker and Jarvis Islands in the equatorial Pacific. It's about high finance, intrigue, unlimited ambition, heroism, fanaticism, betrayal, and about opening space to the common person. The setting is the day after tomorrow. Technology has advanced, the web is more pervasive than ever, but human ambition and greed remain unchanged. In Slingshot, Alex Regent, Margot Jackson, and Klaus Blumenfeld reach for the stars as they blend their skills to create the world's first space launch loop backed by major software money. Environmental fanatic Lars Watson with his team of young eco-terrorists are funded by opposing financial interests who will go to any length to halt the project. Reporter Lori Kutcher indiscriminately applies her own personal skills to ensure that it's she who reports the unfolding events to a watching world. With a cast of 66, Slingshot takes you from Seattle's World Financial District to the ocean bottom at 5,000 feet off Baker Island to the edge of space 80 kilometers above. You play with dolphins and battle sharks. You fly and sail and dive. You work and play and love across the vast panorama of an equatorial Pacific, being put to leash to serve humanity's surge into outer space.
That sounds absolutely incredible. Now, how much was this, how many years was this stewing is my question.
Several. After Keith and I worked out the details, I got involved with the second book in the series called The Star Child Compact and ended up writing the second book before I started the first book, this one.
Nice. So you kind of do what I do. You went backwards so that the whole thing played perfectly. I love
I did that. Mm-hmm. One of the things I had to do as I wrote the second book, because I had a very good idea in mind for how the first book would go, I had to make sure that when I got around to writing the first book, that I didn't violate any of the things that I knew had to be in the first book when I was writing the second.
Now, did you deal with any or worry about any kind of controversy, especially because of the things you were writing about?
I did have some controversy, yes. I have been involved one way or the other with environmental matters most of my adult life. Some of your viewers and listeners may be familiar with the name Dixie Lee Ray. She was the first secretary of the Atomic Energy Commission, which ultimately became the Department of Defense. She was the governor of the state of Washington. She was a Democrat, by the way. She founded Democrats for Reagan, which tells you that she wasn't a typical Democrat. And she was my zoology professor.
Nice. Lucky you.
She opened my eyes to an awful lot of things as they relate to the environment, and helped me to see the difference between some of the scams that are being perpetrated by people who have political motives and what really mattered in the environment, and what it would take to keep our planet safe for our children, our grandchildren. And I modeled one of the main characters in Slingshot after Dixie Lee Ray. She had passed away a couple of decades ago now. But in any case, I modeled one of the main characters after her, with her strength and her ideas and the way she dealt with people.
Now, we love giving little hints that no one else knows about. So, speaking of Dixie, can you tell us, I'm assuming she was your mentor. She definitely had a profound impact. What could you tell us about her that's in the book that I know readers are going to be intrigued and searching that book throughout to find out?
Dixie had
just want a little smidge.
Dixie had a mind of her own, and she was a political person, having been the governor of the state of Washington. And so she understood politics and understood how to deal with the press, with the media. The media gave her a hard time, and she dealt with it very well. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She had a lot of humor. Now, one of the things that Dixie did when she wasn't being the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, when she wasn't being the governor of the state of Washington, when she wasn't being my zoology professor, she raised pigs. And after she retired, she invited the cadre of reporters that had been reporting on her and giving her a hard time for 30 years. She invited them out to her pig ranch and introduced each reporter to the pig that she had named after that reporter.
I love it. That's revenge. Now, how much media coverage do you feel will be involved in this series?
Well, the book itself was launched at the International Space Elevator Conference in Seattle. There is a consortium of scientists around the world that have been working on building a space elevator, which is a way of getting into space without rockets, but that we cannot yet do because we don't have the necessary materials to create the cables that can carry their own weight up that high from the surface of the Earth. And so the concept, Keith Lofstrom's concept of a space launch loop fit their ideas very nicely. And when my book was ready to be released, we set up the schedule so that I would be in Seattle at that international conference, and my book was then made available. And every space elevator scientist on this planet has a copy of my book on their desk.
Oh, that's beautiful. Now, I just personally, I ask questions on this show that I want to know. My own little for your information kind of thing. Because in writing a lot of my characters, I make sure that I have very detailed, oriented kind of stories. And I want to know how much detail on each one of the characters, how close, if you can allow us, in proximity to the characters, is the truth, or where does the truth lie in there?
Well,
or is it all truth?
With the exception of Dixie Lee Ray, and she's not named in the book as Dixie, she has another name, as she heads up this whole project. But with the exception of her, the players are fictional. They're not real people, but they are modeled after people that I have known and people I have worked with, strong men and women. And I started out by creating a written description of each of my characters, right down to the color of socks they wear, what kind of drinks they drink, what kind of music they like to listen to, and so on, all the way through. A group of players in the book are Mohawk Indian high iron men. These are the individuals who've been responsible for constructing most of the high-rise buildings all over the United States, and in many cases in other parts of the world. And since we're dealing here with something which is in effect an 80-kilometer high tower, they were deeply involved with that. And so I spent some time studying Mohawk, learning how to express myself in Mohawk, finding out what kind of cuss words Mohawk high iron workers would use and how they would talk and express things to one another, how they would treat outsiders. And this is all contained in there as well.
Now, I'm assuming you've done different writing and theses and different writing things. However, in writing your novels, how do you feel you can differentiate the two? Are you more deliberate in the attempt to make sure that everything is outlined and detailed down to, like you said, the socks they wore? Or is it more you get all the research information and then you kind of let your characters roam a little? Do you give them room to breathe?
Not only do I give them room to breathe, but occasionally they take over and explain to me that I got them all wrong and that they really want to go in this direction, not the direction I was taking them. And so we sit down and together we work out where I went wrong and fix it so that the characters are satisfied with what they're doing within the framework of the novel.
Now, how hard was it to actually, world build? Because technically, you have outer space to consider as well. You have the ocean and that dynamic. Like, how do you contain everything? That just seems like such a huge project.
First off, let me explain that I am a retired submarine officer, and I have spent a great deal of time in a diving mode called saturation diving, where I have lived under the water, under pressure, in various military modes. I've got 22 submerged months underwater, and that gave me a lot of experience and a lot of material to reach out and take hold of as I was putting together the underwater portions of this novel. And a lot of this novel takes place underwater because much of this structure is underwater.
Mm. You have no idea how not only impressed I am, but I have like a million questions. Because number one, thank you for your service in every capacity. But I'm mesmerized at the idea just conceptually trying to feel like, how do you reel all that in? You have so many different ways of going with this that I'm enamored, truly.
Let me describe one circumstance that I think you will appreciate. My doctorate is in engineering. My wife, who does a lot of my editing, she's my primary editor, is also an engineer. And while I was writing this book, I had to have my characters drop some very massive concrete anchors through 5,000 feet to the seafloor. And actually it was, I'm sorry, not 5,000 feet, 5 kilometers. So that's an awful lot more than 5,000 feet. Anyway, I kind of waved my hands and came up with the amount of time that I thought it would take for them to hit from the surface to hit the seafloor. And my wife was reading this and she said, you know, that doesn't sound right. We better check these numbers. And so we each went off in our own direction, took our spreadsheets, and we calculated, based upon the fundamentals of physics, what it would actually take. It turned out I had them moving way too slow. Each one of us came up with numbers that were within a few decimal places of each other. So we were certain of the correctness of our calculations. And I had to rewrite that section to conform with the real world.
Now, did you have to actually do the calculations for not only the water and its depths, but I'm assuming how much of space and just, you have so many factors that come into play?
Yes, there are. For example, the way this works, you can see in the image behind me, you can see the space station, which is actually floating there. It's not in orbit. It's above one of the islands, either Baker or Jarvis Island. And what looks like a rocket is actually a capsule that's riding up a cable to that station. And in order to work and what it does when it gets into the station, one of the lines that goes over my shoulder, right there, that is actually an encased moving ribbon of iron that moves at 7.2 kilometers per second, which is escape velocity at this height. And the capsule moves up inside this structure and then magnetically attaches itself to that moving ribbon. And then through a sliding effect, at first the attachment is very squishy, and then it gets tighter and tighter as the capsule accelerates until finally it's moving at orbital velocity. And these all had to be calculated. And this is the information that Keith and I worked out during those days we were together to make certain we had all those numbers correct.
Now, did there ever come a time where you sat back in writing this and said, what am I doing? Or was this something that was just so exciting that you were like, I cannot not do this?
Yeah, it just kept on flowing. One of the things I had to do was set up a spreadsheet because, like I said when I read the blurb, there are 66 people who play a role, and I had to make sure that these people were where I left them when they come back into the play. And I had to make sure that if they're moving by boat or by plane or whatever it is from spot to spot, that I don't end up having them in a place they couldn't possibly have been because they couldn't be moving that fast. And so I had to lay that whole thing out and make certain that all the pieces came together.
Now, are you actually looking forward to the day when we are able to not only visit in space, or even if it's possible to go even further in depth into the ocean? Are you looking for those days where it's like, this is what everything I have invested in, my time, my effort, my energy, my knowledge has just ran supreme, basically?
The simple answer to that is yes. Let me expound a little bit.
Forget.
one of the things, Keith wrote the introduction to the book, and one of the things he points out in the introduction is that right now, building a space launch loop is way too expensive. The infrastructure is hugely costly. But as we move more and more equipment and people and freight into space by rocket, the cost for doing that continues to rise. And at some point, the cost for moving freight into space by rocket and the cost for moving freight into space with a space launch loop, those curves cross, and it's suddenly cheaper to do it with a space launch loop. So that when we reach that point, it'll get built because the guys that are doing it want to save money. We calculated that once a space launch loop is in full operation, moving a ton of material into space would be about as expensive as moving it from Los Angeles to San Francisco by train.
Oh my heavens. I feel like my eyes just jumped out of my head. That I can't imagine. When I was a child, I know that we had the different various launches that they were doing, but it was more in exploring, more exploration than it was the idea of us living there or actually visiting in our lifetime. And I just conceivably, I think it not only could be done and possibly will be done, but the idea that it would be so inexpensive and after a while common it's kind of mind-boggling, you know. Now let me ask you, your characters, you have 66 characters, you said. Is there any that are difficult when writing their dialogue? How do you work the dialogue, especially into a project like this?
A fair number of my characters come out of the diving world, either as Navy SEALs or Navy divers or as commercial divers. And they are recruited for this project because the project needs men and women with expertise in these areas. And one of the guys who gets recruited is from Scotland, and he speaks with a heavy Scottish brogue. And it was a lot of fun getting that right. The book also exists in audio form, and the Trenton Bennett, who did the audio, he got the Irish brogue down pat. It's wonderful.
That's awesome. I can't imagine. Now 66 characters that's a lot. How do you, well, let me ask you this, with those characters, how do you get into their psyche? How does that play out?
It depends on the role that they play. My major characters, the 3 engineers and the director of the program, of course, they are fully fleshed out because they become real in the reader's mind. Mm-hmm. Several other characters are also fleshed out because they rise to the occasion, and at least in some part of the book, and sometimes repeatedly in different portions of the book, become important. And so their personalities and who they are and what they are becomes meaningful. And some of the players, some of the 66 players, they're little more than background players. They have a name, they speak occasionally, but they're not fully fleshed out because there's no need to. There's no need to know that much about them.
Now, if you had to put your kind of stamp on what this book, what you want to deliver, the message, what is it?
The message is that our destiny is, as the human race, is off this planet. Our destiny is the universe at large. And we're going to get there one way or the other. And the space launch loop, as described in Slingshot, may very well end up being how we will do it.
Do you have any of your colleagues that have tried to kind of pump you for information on the continuation of, if they've read the first story, they want to know where it's going and what's involved and am I in it, so to speak?
In a sense, yes. Let me jump briefly to a short description of the second book in the series because it's pertinent here, and then you'll see what I mean. One of my big interests, as you probably figured out by now, is humans moving into space. And therefore, the exploratory missions that we've had, both manned and unmanned, have been of great interest to me. The Cassini spacecraft several years ago did a very close flyby of Saturn's moon, Iapetus. And I was viewing the videos that were sent back from that flyby, and I noticed something really remarkable. And I am going to take just a moment here, and I'm going to just change the background so that you can see what I'm talking about. It'll take just a moment, and the background will become that moon. Just let me pick it up here. Just a moment. Okay. It's not happening quite as quickly as I wanted to. Here we go. I got to exit full screen to do it. And now, just an additional moment. Hopefully, I won't take too long on this. If I do, I'll just try to describe it instead. But it really makes for a very interesting. One moment here. Now, okay, I'll just have to describe it. It's not popping up for me. Iapetus is a large moon, and it has a ridge right around the equator that's about 20 kilometers high and 20 kilometers wide. It's a mountain ridge. And it goes all the way around the equator. The moon looks like it might be a walnut out in space. Furthermore, it is a rocky moon, but the density of the moon, as measured by the Cassini flyby, was kind of as if it were a snowball, but it's not. It's a rocky moon. And so I got to thinking, I did some calculating and some figuring, and I determined that, you know, if this moon were hollow, then the density numbers would come out just right. And then I said to myself, speculatively, what if Iapetus were a derelict starship? And from that rose the story, The Star Child Compact. And in the second book in this series, Earth's nations put together a massive expedition to go and find out exactly what Iapetus is. The first half of the book is the building of the spaceship and getting there with the problems that happen anytime you take a major deep space journey like this. And the second half of the book is what they find when they get there, which is it is indeed a derelict starship, and they end up meeting the descendants of the people who originally brought it to our solar system, and that goes on to make a very interesting story that affects everybody on the planet.
Now, how do you deal with the elements when it comes to outer space? Like the storms and things like that, especially in building or even exploring if we are to live there.
Well,
how will they play into the stories?
If you're talking, for instance, about solar storms, which you have to be very careful of when you're flying in a spaceship out in the vacuum of space, the ship that my characters designed had a core deep inside that was well protected from radiation. And during one of several solar storms that hit them while they were making this long, many-month transit, they crowded into the core to keep themselves safe from the radiation. When it comes to the moon Iapetus itself, it did not have an atmosphere, but it was partially hollow, and inside the moon there was an atmosphere, which they discovered. And I don't want to give anything away from the story, but it becomes rather dramatic and rather interesting as the science and the engineering and the technology play themselves out with the people who are involved. And the people come from several nations on Earth, both men and women.
Nice. And I'm right there with you. As you see, I know where we're going with this. Now, how do you see in the future, when this is accomplished, what is going to happen with air travel itself? How will planes and things like that, do you think that they'll just become obsolete?
Well, if you want to go to the grocery store that's 3 blocks away and you don't want to walk, you kind of have to have some type of vehicle. I suppose it could be a Segway or a scooter, but most people like to get inside a car where they don't get wet when it's raining. So I think that we will continue to have some type of transportation. People have talked about flying cars for a long time. We still don't have them, and I suspect we probably won't because tires are so much easier. Planes, well, planes will take you a greater distance faster than cars will. They're expensive. It requires a whole infrastructure, traffic control and everything else to keep them going. And we have to take that into consideration. And I think that's going to stay around. When you come to international travel or major passenger travel between cities and between nations, this may very well change. There is no reason from an engineering point of view why we can't use something that is a little bit like rocket ships now. They're called hypersonic planes that can get, say, from New York to London in a half hour, can get from the West Coast to the East Coast in a half hour. These kinds of things, I think, are on the horizon, and we'll be seeing them for transportation on our own planet. And when it comes to traveling between planets, well, the future is wide open, and there's a lot about technology that we have hints of, but we don't really know what lies out ahead. And it's this speculative area that I play with in my science fiction novels.
Now, have you ventured growing up? This is just kind of, put it this way, as a little assumption. Did you read about UFOs and about extraterrestrials? And if so, where do you see them falling into this whole spectrum?
Oh, I was an avid reader as a teenager and a preteen. I really loved all of that. And as I became more science literate, I found out that many of the ideas I had were not really science literate ideas. And so I learned over time to discard them. But I remember the Project Blue Book report that came out in the late 1950s. I ordered a copy as soon as it was available, and I read every word in it. Mostly what it said is, yeah, these unidentified flying objects, here's what they really were. But toward the end, there was a section that said, but then there are these that we just don't understand. We don't know for sure what they were. We think they might be this, or we think they might be that. Where am I today? I am absolutely convinced that we are not the only intelligent species in our universe. It simply doesn't make sense by any perspective, whether you are religious or whether you're not religious. No matter how you look at it, it makes no sense to have a universe that is so large that it takes light billions of years to cross, and we're the only species that is sentient. I can't believe that. So sooner or later, we're going to run into somebody, and it just depends on how smart they are and how smart we are as to whether we manage to get along or not.
Now, should that happen, would you assume they would be of way higher intelligence, being since they have penetrated our atmosphere, basically? And
well,
have the vehicles to do such?
I hear what you're saying. And my take is when the Europeans discovered the Americas, they didn't all get together and say, let's go talk nice to these people, and let's set up some trade, and let's find out how their government functions. None of that happened. What happened was that individual entrepreneurial types, explorer types, with different perspectives and different objectives and different agenda, went and did their thing. Some of them were friendly, some of them weren't. And the bottom line was that most of the more primitive groups in the Americas were seriously exploited by the Europeans who came in. Now, if we take that analogy and look at it as if we were the primitives and we had a more advanced, I'm not saying more intelligent, just technologically more advanced race come in contact with us, we would have to be very careful not to let ourselves fall into that kind of a trap.
Now, how do you think globally that different nations would deal with the concept of, and actually you of all people, I would imagine with your past, your vast experience, how does politics fall into the concept of going into outer space?
I think that guys like Elon Musk and others who have a lot of money, have a lot of technology, and a lot of smart people working for them will simply go do what they want to do, and governments be damned. They're not going to pay much attention to governments. And I think that if we end up in contact with an alien sentient species, I think that their dealings will mostly be with our guys who manage to get out there and exploit the space environment in some way. And I think that's where the contact will lie.
Now, what is most fun for you? Was it writing the novel? Was it the research? Was it the years in a submarine, which I haven't even touched on yet? I am just ecstatic. You have no idea. I'm ready for a lunch date. How's that? It takes a long time when it comes to being able to take all of your considerations throughout your life that you have loved learning about and kind of putting them all on one plate, and I'm just so ecstatic that you came to join us.
Let me throw a couple of other things into the mix. I spent a year on the equator doing research into the feasibility of mining manganese nodules from the ocean floor. This was in the Pacific equatorial waters. And I spent 3 years up in the Arctic ice pack investigating the whole ecological ecosystems of the Arctic in order to lay out a baseline so that when the inevitable would happen and there would be an oil spill or some other kind of a tragedy, that we would know where we needed to get things back to. So add that to the mix.
Okay. And as far as, let me ask you this. I'm going to kind of switch tracks. The Walking Dead concept. Do you see an end of the world kind of, I guess, how do I put it? Almost as a new beginning to the new venture of why we would partake in going into outer space? Do you think there would be something catastrophic that would have to come into play?
I don't think so at all. I have enjoyed watching Elon Musk, who came out of a family environment in South Africa, came to the United States, found that he could make a lot of money, was interested in space, and now he's building a ship to go to Mars. And he's going to do it. He's going to take people to Mars with him, and they're going to create a settlement on Mars. I think that's how it's going to happen. And the human race is built for exploration. Our mindset is one that says, what's on the other side of that hill? What's beyond that ocean? What's on the other side of that river? It's always been that way, and I think it will continue to be that way. I don't buy into the Walking Dead concept or the apocalyptic end of human society. I don't see that happening.
I definitely concur. Definitely. The idea of all that we've been through in the past year, how have you kept your mind at peace when it comes to continuing on with writing? Have you had any difficulties? Has this kind of been like one of those, okay, we're set up for this. This is nothing.
When I came back from the South Pole, I met a young woman. She was younger than I, and I ended up, unfortunately, breaking her heart. But 28 years later, while I was surfing the internet, I stumbled across a website that this same young woman had put together as a memorial for her father who passed away. And I reached out tentatively, and the next thing you know, we got married. And this gal, Jill, carried me right through the pandemic as if it weren't even there.
That's wonderful. Now, back on those submarines. Tell me what it is like for someone who has never experienced such.
I have a series of books that is not science fiction called the Mac McDowell Missions. The first is called Operation Ivy Bells, based on my own experiences during the Cold War when I took a group of divers, saturation divers, on a nuclear submarine into the Sea of Okhotsk between Kamchatka Peninsula and northern Siberia. We locked out of the submarine on the ocean bottom and tapped into Soviet underwater communications cables. This book is a bestseller, and it has spawned a series of follow-on books. The second, called Operation Icebreaker, is about the same group of divers laying acoustic arrays underneath the Arctic ice pack out of a nuclear submarine. And the third book, Operation Arctic Sting, which is in release right now. It'll be available for pre-purchase. It could be available for pre-purchase while we've been talking. It may have populated onto Amazon. It'll actually be released on the 7th of July. But I'm sorry, the 4th of August. It'll be released on the 4th of August. But anyway, these all involve submarining and saturation diving, which I did for many, many years. And they describe in detail, but not overwhelming, in interesting, fascinating detail, what it's like to live, sleep, and fight a submarine. What is it like? Well, a submarine is tight quarters. You got a lot of men, and you have to be smart. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be as good at your job as a person can be. And everyone on the sub is like that, as good as they can be at the job they are assigned to. And you work together as a team to carry out the mission of the submarine.
I feel as though our readers that are watching the show are going to be as astounded as I have been throughout. And your book sales, just to let you know, are going to go through the roof even further. And I am so happy about it, because it is not only interesting, it is delightful to hear how in depth that every facet of your life has been attached to something monumentous kind of thing. And it's beautiful. And I love that. Absolutely love that. I am so glad you came on the show to be with us tonight.
Just imagine this. I got paid for doing this.
Did you? Awesome.
Paid me to do this stuff.
Let me ask you this. What is or was, growing up, your favorite book to read?
The book I remember most out of my very young childhood is Just David. Does that ring a bell?
It does, but what was the point in that book that somehow I feel like it influenced?
David was the son of a world famous violinist. He decided to get off the grid, although they didn't have a grid back when the story took place. And he and his son went up to a hermitage in a mountain. And he raised his son out of contact with society. And the boy would go out with his Stradivarius violin. He didn't know it was a Stradivarius, and would play the flowers or play the bush or play the birds. And he would just spontaneously experience life as a young boy. Well, his father realized that he was about to die, and he went down with his son into the valley, found a farmer's place, went into the barn, and died overnight. And then the farmer found this boy and his fiddle, not knowing that it was $50,000 Stradivarius. And they took him into their lives, and then he influenced their lives because they learned to see the world through his innocent eyes. And then when their son finally came back from business in the big city and looked at the Stradivarius, realized what it was, then the whole story came out. And this was a story that I just loved as a boy.
And because of the vision and the beautiful inspiration of the book.
That is correct.
It gives you that sense of exploration that you have always longed for. And I think it's amazing. I really do.
But my parents were both Pentecostal ministers. They had been in Poland as 20-somethings before the war, escaped by the skin of their teeth, went to Montana, and that's where I was born. For me, somehow life needed excitement, and the most exciting thing I could imagine was being a fireman. So I wanted to be a fireman, and then I discovered over time that there were things that were even more exciting than being a fireman, and I always gravitated to that, and I ended up in submarines.
That is awesome. Tell us where your books right now are available and how can we reach you?
The easiest way to find my books is to go to my website, which is robertwilliscroft.com. But if you Google my name, I'm all over the internet. You'll find me on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and anywhere that books are sold. You'll find my name in my books. You may not find the books on the shelf, but you'll certainly find me in the catalogs. The quickest way is probably Amazon. Just if you Google my name on Amazon, that'll bring up my author's page with all the books.
I have had such a delightful time, as you can tell. I've been in awe, and I am just so happy. Thank you so much for coming to join me tonight, to join us. And I wish you all the success in the world. And hopefully one day we'll meet up there again. If not, hopefully here.
That would be really cool. I so much enjoyed talking with you, sharing my thoughts and feelings with your viewers. This has been delightful.
I'm so glad. Feel free to come join us anytime. It would be my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You have a lovely evening. Viewers, readers, writers, I hope and pray you stay until the end of this show and you have gotten to meet Robert Williscroft. I'll get his name straight. Williscroft. And I hope you have had a wonderful time and enjoyed this as much as I have. Have a beautiful night, everyone. This has been Night Vision. Good night.